Okay, so the many forms of Loki are very suspicious in One Piece because his initial appearance as a silhouette in Chiffon's vision looks completely different from how he looks when he becomes an actual character in the series. With that being said, too, I think there's a reason for this. Unlike in other situations in One Piece in which the silhouette looks completely different from the character, I think there's an actual canonical reason as to why Loki varies so differently from silhouette to his initial appearance. With that being said, too, one thing I would like to point out, however, is that the three-pronged crown in Chiffon's flashback is represented in Loki's initial design because he has a three-pronged crown Jolly Roger on his belt. So that's a very cool factor that I just want to point out. Otherwise, I think the reason why his proportions change so widely in all other depictions, despite him being a giant with horns and a very large giant at that, is because of the mini fruit, or at least the canonical variation of the mini fruit. Because in one of the times in which we've seen the mini fruit, in which there have been two, and it's very interesting, like I've said in other videos, how the mini fruit has jumped from video game into anime filler. But talking about that anime filler, we have the daughter of Pan's Fry, known as Lily Instomach. Both of them are from Elbaf, and much like Harold, Pan's Fry knew Dorian Broggy in childhood. However, the funny part about Lily Instomach is that she can actually change her proportions with the ability of the mini fruit, as we have seen her with a huge head and a tiny body during the anime filler. So, with the canonical variation of this fruit, I think Loki can change the various proportions of his body to appear in a number of ways. This is very much like what the age fruit can do, as we've seen Bonnie assume proportions similar to that of a buccaneer before. If this is true, this would explain why he appears so much smaller in Chiffon's vision of him, and this would also be a very interesting analog to both Nika and the Loki of Norse mythology, because if you didn't know, the Loki of Norse mythology was very well known for being a shapeshifter. And with the power of the mini fruit here, if this is all true, he would literally be able to shift his shape around by making various parts of his body larger and smaller to attain a form that looks like his original dopey silhouette form. But this would also make sense too as to why Loki thinks he is Nika, because as we've seen throughout the story of One Piece, especially once forms started becoming a part of Luffy's toolkit, we see that growing and shrinking and changing the proportions of his body becomes some of the main factors of how he fights. Because we see in Gear 3rd, he makes his arm the size of a giant. But the caveat of Gear 3rd in the pre-time skip is that he would shrink. But then that leads into Gear 4th and how he would change his proportions around, becoming more muscular and bouncy in combination with his arm in hockey. This extends to the various other forms of Gear 4th, like Tank Man and Snake Man, in which he becomes more lean or more bulky. But this all comes to a head when we have Gear 5th, otherwise known as Nika, in which he can do all of this freely. Like when he pumps up and says in the anime, "Monkey D muscles, muscles," in which he becomes muscular in fighting Kaido. So size and proportion control have always been a part of Luffy's toolkit from very early on in the story, because Enies Lobby is pretty early on at this point. So with that being said, that's why I think Loki thinks he is Nika, and why he has so many weird forms throughout the manga up into his eventual reveal. And I think we will see this once he is let free and we really get to see what he can actually do. But with that being said, give me your thoughts and tell your friends about Polypede Whoops!